Hello everyone and welcome to another wire wrap video tutorial. My name is Jim McIntosh and this week's tutorial is really kind of an easy one, but it's a great one for big stones. A lot of those big stones are just beautiful and a lot of people are intimidated to use them. But when you see them, buy them because they're going to be great for this particular project. So we're going to work with a nice big stone today, all right? So if you're ready to get into it, let's head to the bench. So before we get started on this, I wanted to just kind of show you what we're coming up with today. And this is a piece, this is a bale that's kind of holding on to these little ears here. They were put on here to hold this in. It's a simple, very simple wrap that we've got here in the back with some prongs. And you don't have to use prongs. You can make a nice swirled piece. You can take these prongs and instead of cutting them, you can kind of put a decorative swirls in the front of this, which would look great. This is a nice piece of 16 gauge square wire. These are the setting is made from 18 gauge square wire. And a very simple piece. I've added this little closed loop as a bale. You don't need this here. In fact, this is just something I'll show you towards the end that you can add in here. But so before we get started on the project, we probably should take a look at all of the tools you're going to need. And we're not going to be using anything out of the ordinary. We're going to be using tools that we've been using throughout all of my projects. So for this one, we're going to, of course, need our Wrapmaker pliers. These are going to help us make our wraps, and we can also use these as flat nose. So these are a good tool to have. We're going to need something to cut the wire with, so good pair of flush cutters that we'll need. We're also going to use some round nose pliers, and these are going to help us to make the bale portion of the piece as well as to be able to connect it. You're going to need something to measure with because we're going to be measuring some of our wires, so this would be handy. It's a flat ruler. We're going to use a fine tip permanent marker. It's a nice fine tip on here, so we use that. We're going to use painter's tape, and you guys know that I always use painter's tape because this is what's going to hold the wire bundle together so that we can use it. And this is something that you really do need quite often, and I always stress to use this because it makes wire wrapping so much easier when you have control over your wires. And I use just some scissors to be able to cut the tape off. We're going to be using a chasing hammer as well as a bench block. These two things are going to work hand in hand. And we're also going to be using my flat hand file. We're going to be using this side of it. I always say that when you get a hand file, make sure that it's got a filing surface on all four sides of it because we're going to be using this small size. You can also use a needle file to do this. I just have found that this hand file just gives me more control, and I like using this much better. So that's all the tools. Let's talk about just some of the basic materials we're going to need now. So first of all, we're going to need a cabochon. Now, I prefer for this particular project to use a longer cabochon. And this one, let me grab my measuring tool here. This one's about, let's see, it's about almost a 25, about 24 by approximately 45. I like a nice long stone, something long and a little bit narrow for this. So this is a good stone, but just any good sized stone will work. A 30 by 40 millimeter will work great. It's just a nice, this is a nice project for those big stones, those really nice statement piece stones. So I've got this this nice piece of agate here that I'm going to be using. Now, we're going to use 3 different types of wire. We're not going to be using a lot of each type of wire. The bale for this is going to be made out of 16 gauge square wire. A heavier wire is preferred in this. Something like about a 14 gauge would work as well. The reason being is you want something that's going to be sturdy. And this is going to be kind of carrying a little bit of the weight of that stone and the setting and everything. So little bit of it. I think we're going to use about 6 inches of this 16 gauge. The setting for the stone is going to be from 18 gauge square wire, and that's typical for these prong settings that I use on these pieces. It's a nice sturdy wire, a nice gauge for this, and we're going to hold this together with some 18 gauge half round wire as well. And I'm using sterling silver for this. You can use whatever wire that you prefer to use. Just make sure it's the proper shape. Square for the framing and for the bale, and half round for the binding for this. And that's all the materials we're going to need. So now let's jump right into the project. So to begin the project, we're going to start with the setting first. We'll make the bale afterwards, but the first thing we want to concentrate on is the setting. So we've got our ruler out here, and I want to cut 2 wires of the 18 gauge square. I'm going to cut 2 of them at 5 inches each. So here's one at 5, and then here's number 2 at 5. And once you get yours cut, straighten them out just by running them between your fingers, as we normally do. I know that many of you have watched all of my videos up to this point. We always do some of this. These steps are all kind of similar and the same, but you're just going to take and run your fingers up and down the metal, this wire here, just to make sure we get it straight. And we're not looking for perfectly straight, but we want relatively straight. And you can use some pliers for this. You can use a cleaning cloth to do this. Some people just grab a little piece of this sunshine cloth or this cleaning cloth, and they just kind of use that. And sometimes it's because you get that wear and tear on your fingertips, but we just want relatively straight. And once you've got it straight, we want to find the middle of each one of these. So we said it was 5 inches, so the center of this would be 2.5 inches. So we're going to make a mark here at 2.5, and we'll do the same thing with this one. We will find the middle at 2.5, make that mark. Now from that center mark, I want to give you kind of an overview as to what we're going to be making. This is what the frame will look like. We're going to be making this piece. So the center is right here that I just made in each of those wires. That's the center. So what we want to do first is we want to do this little section right here that's going to stick out from the side of the stone. So we're going to make that first, and it is 5 millimeters. So I want you to take your ruler, and you're going to use the millimeter side, and I want you to line this up with the 2.5 millimeter mark. Right about there. I know we're talking small measurements here. And then I want you to just make a mark on either side of that center mark at 0 and at 5 millimeters. Okay, do the same thing with the second one. We're going to line this up with 0, or excuse me, with 2.5. Then we're going to make a mark here at 0 and at the 5 millimeter. Now, we want to take and use our Wrapmaker pliers. If you don't have a set of these yet, which you can get these on my website, there's a link down in the description, but you can use flat nose pliers for this as well. And what I want you to do is I want you to take, and I want you to line up at one of those outside marks. And we're going to bend the wire away from you, making an L in this. And then we're going to do the same thing with the other one. Line up the edge of these pliers. So I'm right here at the second mark, and then I'm just going to push this side of it away from me, like that. And I want you to try and do your best to square this up. It doesn't have to be perfectly square. In fact, you can even make this a round piece. This is what the bale is going to attach to. This is what it's going to attach to. So imagine the stone is centered on here, and this is sticking out. This little ear here is sticking out, and that's what the bale is going to attach to right up in here. This could be round. If you wanted a round piece, then just use your round nose pliers and center it here on this wire and then bring it around. But you want it so it's kind of wide so that you can actually use this. Now do the same thing with your second one. We're not gonna waste time doing that, but just assume that I'm doing this to both. Okay, so now we want to make measurements down these arms that we've got here, and we want this so that it will stick out from outside of the stone. Now this particular stone is about 24 millimeters wide, so I'm going to divide that in half, so that gives me 12, and I do want a couple of millimeters to kind of hang out from the outside. I want probably about 3 millimeters ish, 3 or 4 millimeters sticking out from the outside of the stone. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to round the number up to 15 millimeters. So what I want you to do is I want you to measure down each of these arms and make a mark. When we start here at the tip where we've just made this bend, I've got it lined up with the 15 millimeter mark right there, and I'm going to put a mark here at 0 on either side. So we've got one there, and then let me put my up here, and I've got it lined up with 15, and I'm going to make a mark there at 0. So you should have a mark on each leg of this, and they should be pretty close to being the same. So we'll set that aside, and now I want you to do the same thing we did with this top piece. I want you to take your Wrapmaker pliers, and I want you to just line it up on the inside of that mark you made, and we're just going to use that to bend away from you. And now this side we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to bend it toward us because we're not going to move everything. So now we're just going to bend this way. So now you should have something that looks similar to this one. So let me show you what we've got. See, so that's what we've got. Copper, silver. Okay. To check this, to make sure that both sides are even and level, I take my ruler and I straighten these arms out a little bit, and then I just kind of use this to kind of make sure it's square, and the top part is not quite exactly square how I want it. Okay, and I just kind of square things up because I prefer this, on this particular piece, I like it to be nice and squared up. If you've got yours round, this side here is round, just make sure that these two sides are level. Okay, so we've got this done. Now do the same thing to the other side, and once you get that done, we'll come back and we'll continue from there. Alright, so you should have now two sides that look identical, and what I want you to do is I want you to bring them together, and I want to match up those two areas, those two bent areas, and I'm going to take a piece of painter's tape. Once I get them lined up, I'm going to take a piece of painter's tape and I'm going to tape both the wires here together at the top. So here we are at the top, and I'm going to make a little flag. So I brought them around so it's taped nice and tight. And then I'm going to do the same thing here on the other end, making sure that I keep everything even where I want it. And we're going to take another piece of tape and we're going to put it across the two wires, bring it around and make another little flag. So I should have two flags holding it together, and you can double check to make sure you've got everything even and where they need to be, and it looks like I do. So good. So this is what we have. So now what we need to do is we need to mark out a wrap section for this, the area that we're going to file away and add a wrap to. And we're going to put a wrap above and below this section, these two ears here. Okay, so, and we're going to make those 5 millimeters. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark an area from where the two wires come together after this after your bent wires, and I'm going to measure down these to 5 millimeters, and I'm going to make a mark across the 2 wires. And I'll do the same thing with the other side, starting here at the bends, coming down the length of these wires where they come together, 5 millimeters. So here's what we have. We've got 2 areas here, and that's going to be the area that we're going to file away, and we're going to put a wrap in. So let's do that now. But before we do that, I want to take 2 more pieces of tape, and I want to tape just outside of those marks. That way it holds everything together a little better so that we can file them. I'm telling you, this painter's tape is a lifesaver because it takes out a lot of the problems of having to manipulate these wires. So I've got a piece of tape on the outside of each of those little marks I made here. So now I've got my hand file, and I'm going to use the edge of my hand file, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut away about 1/2 millimeter in that section, just the depth of 1/2 millimeter, and I'm just going to file across these 2 between, and notice I'm filing between where they come together and the mark that I just made. Alright, so I'm going to turn it around and make sure I've got a good cut on both sides. And I do like to take the edge, put it on edge, and just get where the line is. And I'll do the same thing over here on this other side. I'm going to file the area away. It takes a few swipes with this. I always turn it around to make sure I have everything even. Just holding on over here and just take a couple more marks. I'm going to make sure I have a nice defined edge there. There we go. Alright, so we should have 2 areas now that we have gone ahead and cut away. Now we're going to wrap these 2 together. So get your 18 gauge half round, and you're going to need, I'd say, a good 6 or 8 inches. And this is where the beauty of these wrap pliers comes in, because we're going to start here at one side. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Wrapmaker pliers, and I'm going to put them where that mark was. So I put the long end right here where the mark is of where that I just cut away for the wrap, and then it creates this little gap in between the pliers. And in the shorter end, this end right here, I'm just going to take my wrap wire and I'm going to put it in there until it bottoms out, and then I'm just going to make some wraps. So I'm going to wrap from here to up here. So do a couple wraps. And see, that's so much easier to do with these Wrapmaker pliers. Okay, so now we are just about where we want to stop that wrap. So now I want to span this gap. So all I'm going to do is, now that I've got the wrap wire on the same side as I am, actually what I want to do first is I want to set this wrap in place. So I'm just going to take my Wrapmaker pliers and just squeeze them down a bit so they're nice and flat. Okay, so I've got this wrap wire straight the same side of me, so I've started and I've ended so far. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to span the gap. So I brought it across that gap, and then I'm going to start my wrap on this side. So there we have a wrap. I always like to kind of set that first one just to make sure it's in the right place. And you can actually hold this down now with the Wrapmaker pliers and finish the wrap. Sometimes that gives you that a little more leverage, because we want a good tight wrap here. We don't want a loose wrap, because this is going to be what holds all of this together, okay? So just make a good wrap. So now I've got that cuts area where I filed away. That is completely wrapped now. So now what I want to do is I want to take and trim the excess off. And I'm going to trim the ends of my wrap on the same side as the side I spanned over. This is now going to be the inside, or up against the stone, so people won't see these things. they will just see the wraps, nice freshly done wraps, and then take those ends and push them down. Now something I like to do, and I didn't mention this, but I just have gotten in this habit, is I like to take the wrap and I like to put the cut ends against my bench block. And if you have a rawhide mallet, and I didn't mention this in the tools discussion, but what I like to do is I like to hit those a little bit, but you can also hit those ears that you've made, because what that does is that hardens this wire a bit, and the rawhide mallet does just that. It will make this firm and almost make it half-hard wire without flattening or denting or causing any marks on your wire. So and that makes it nice and firm. And now you can take all this tape off of here. Set this aside. And we'll get this one too. Get this side. We'll take these off. And the next thing we want to do is we want to center this. Actually, before we do that, we want to make sure we have the correct side facing us. So this is the cut side, and it's facing me. And now I want to take these end wires, and I want to spread them out about a 45-degree angle from where they come out of the wrap. And if you take your Wrapmaker pliers, and you can just kind of make sure they're nice and straight where they come out, and that puts a lot of pressure here at the end, and that also makes a nice firm wrap. So separate these out to about a 45-degree angle, and I always like to make sure I got them nice and straight here coming out of there. So there we go. And I think I have a piece of tape on me. Okay, I got it off. So the next thing you want to do is we want to center the setting with the cut ends up facing me. We want to just take a look. I want you to see where I'm putting this. I want to put this so that the ears of this, I have a very slippery stone, so it's going to be moving around a bit. But what I want to do is I want to put this so that it is starting not in the center of the stone for lengthwise, but so that it's just above that, because we want the weight to be in the bottom of this, and that will make sure that it stays flat when somebody's wearing it. Okay, so in order to make the measurements, what I've done is I've cut about a 4-inch piece of tape, and I cut a thin piece of it. And what I want to do is I want to actually put this where I want it, and I want to center it so that it's down just enough. That looks pretty close to what I want. And when I figure out where I want it, I just tape the stone down, and then I can move the setting where I want it. And notice I put the tape where the ears are, so this tells me where that's at, so that I can make sure I've got it centered. And once I have everything centered where I want it, I take my fine tip permanent marker, and I'm going to mark each of these wires where they come out from the stone. I'm going to mark them. That's where we're going to bend each of these for the setting. And the fourth one, there we go. So you should now should be able to take this tape off and set your stone aside. So you should now have marks at 4 spots on your wires. And I think I got the top just off just a little bit. This one's too high right here. I'm going to kind of bring it down a little bit. Make a mark right about there where it's even. And let me just double check the bottom half. This one needs to go down just a little bit, so I can make some minor adjustments. And what causes the problem are these ears. Normally, it's taping all of this together is not difficult, but let's see how close I got. What we're going to do now is we're going to bend these wires. I've got tape stuck on me again. So I'm going to put my my Wrapmaker pliers here just outside of those marks again, and I'm going to bend toward me. And I want to make sure that the cut end is still upward. And I'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to put just outside and bend it 90 degrees. So notice what I got here. I got a nice 90-degree bend in each of those. Do the same thing at the bottom. Just outside, bend upward. Again, just outside of that mark, and bend toward me again. And now I should have 4 of these wires bent toward me, just like that. Now I can take my stone. Like I said, this is a slick stone. And I can put it in the setting, and I can kind of move my wires around a little bit. And once I get my wires where I want them, nice and even, I can then take and just push them over the stone to secure those or lock those kind of in place where I want them. And if you have to adjust your wire just a little bit, that's good. If you have to take the stone out and do that, that's fine. But we're going to put these there. Okay, so I should have 4 of those over there. Now I can take and just cut these off, just trim them. We're not cutting them where they're finally going to be at, but we want to trim them so we have some room to work. So I'm just cutting some of that excess off. Now something else you can do, see, I've got a very busy stone, and I didn't want to put anything on the front of it. I want the stone to shine through. I wanted people to see the stone. That's a good thing about this type of setting. But if you've got a stone that maybe has some nice curves in it, you can take some of these prong wires, and instead of trimming them off, you can actually move them across the face of this. And I've got a great tutorial that's on that. And I'll leave something up here in the cards, and also leave something down below in the description of where you can check that out. It's a great pendant project that really shows how you can use these prongs. Instead of making them prongs, you can use them as something to swirl across. But I've got these great marks on here, and I'm not going to cover up the stone. So once you're satisfied with where your prongs are, I want you to take a look at the back and notice how high this is. You see where I've got everything? See, this is not down here in the middle. This is up about the top 2/3, or about the top 1/3 rather, of this. And I've got it so it's pretty centered on the stone. So once I do that, I want to now trim these to where they're going to just go over the stone just a little bit. So I've got this right here. This is where the curve of the stone starts to flatten out in the top, and so I've cut it that short. I'm going to do the same thing with all 4 of these. And it's better to cut prongs that are too long than too short, because you can't add wire. You can take wire off, but you can't add more wire. So just trim these back just a little bit. There we go. And you might want to take another look at them and make sure they're even. I know this one's just slightly long. Again, you want to be very careful. Okay. This one's just a little long. So you just take your time. Just trim a little bit away at a time. All right, very good. That's good for that. So once you get your prongs where you want them, what we want to do is we want to shape the prongs. So that means we've got to take the stone out. We don't want to harm the stone. So open up 2 of the prongs, and that'll allow the stone to pop out. Now what we want to do is we want to add a curve. See, you see what I'm talking about? You're going to end up with tape all over you, trust me. I keep picking up a piece of tape every time I move over to put my tools down. But what we want to do is we want to shape these prongs so they've got a curve to them. Okay? You can do that with a small needle file and just file them, give them the shape that you want, because you don't want a blunt end, the cut end. You want a nice curve to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my going to use I've got a flex shaft. One of the people that watch my videos all the time sent me a great flex shaft and a great rotary tool for it. I thank you very much for that. It's been wonderful so far. And what I'm going to do is I've got this one's almost done. I have a silicone rubber polishing wheel in here, and I'll show you where you can get those down in the description. But what this does is this will cut and polish these ends. Let me show you what I'm talking about. See, so all I'm doing is shaping this. I'm taking some of the rough edge off, and I'm just going to put a nice curve to it. I'm going to finish these up. I'll come back after I get done with the last one. Okay, so we're here on the fourth one. I'm almost done with this. I'm just putting the finishing touches here on this. Just giving it a nice shape. I also want to take this rough tip off. Okay, so let's set that aside. So now I've got all four of these shaped, and it's difficult to see. I'll try and see if I can't get a nice picture of this for you, but I've just curved each of those prongs. Now this, remember, the shorter side is, these short from here to here is shorter than from here down to here. And that just shows you which side is which. So this is the top and this is the bottom. You just want to remember that. And you want to put your stone back in. But before we do that, I want you to note that we've got, still have some marks here that we left from the from when we set all this up. And we want to take those off. And it's real simple to do. I'm using some non-acetone fingernail polish remover and a Q-tip or a cotton bud or whatever you refer to this as. Just put a little bit of this in the cap. Now, you don't need much. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit, and I'm just going to soak the end. And then what you can do is you can just rub it on these permanent marks that you've made. And they come right off. See how the cotton bud is getting black? It's picking up that permanent marker. And you can do the same on the other side. Just kind of clean up that. Make sure you clean up any others that may be seen. Some of them won't be seen, but we'll just kind of clean those up right quick. And that will give us a nice clean piece. This would also be about the point you'd want to start thinking about polishing the piece as well. So you can even do that. You can even get out a polisher or whatever method you polish. And we'll do a tutorial on that soon, but polishing this up right now would be great with the stone out. Alright, so let's reset our stone. So remember, short side's the top, longer side's the bottom. You need to put the stone in how you wanted it. I wanted the brown section at the top. I don't know if I initially had set it up that way, but that's how this was set up. Okay, so it's back in there. And now we're going to take our Wrapmaker pliers, and like I said, these take the place of flat nose pliers. You know, the old way I used to do it, I would use flat nose pliers. These, I'm going to be using these Wrapmaker pliers because they do so many different things, and they do take the place of flat nose pliers. So I'm going to put one jaw below the bend, and then the other jaw at the top of the prong, and I'm just going to push it onto the piece. Okay, and we'll do the same thing over here. We will take and bend it over the top of the piece. Be careful when you do this that you don't slip off. We want this firmly against the stone, but we don't want to break or scratch the stone. And if you've got a softer stone like turquoise, that could cause a scratch in it. So I always also kind of keep my thumb close, so if I come off of it I might go into my thumb. I'd rather go into my thumb than go into the stone. Alright, so at the bottom and then push the top of that over. And now we'll do the same thing here. Let me kind of straighten him up a bit. This guy's not exactly where I wanted him. Okay, facing the middle. And then at the top, and we'll push that over the stone. Now you should be able to take your stone, hold it by the ears, and if you can shake it back and forth and it doesn't feel like it's moving or rattles or anything, feels like it's rattling, you should be good. If it is rattling, that means that you've probably got one of these prongs not perfectly set in the right place, and you may have to loosen these prongs up. You don't want to do that too many times, because every time you loosen these prongs up, you cause and rebend it. The more you take it off and rebend, the looser and weaker that this prong gets, and you run the risk of it snapping right here where the bend is made. It makes it weaker. So only do it once or twice very most. Okay, and just make sure you've got your prongs where you want them. And that's it for this part. You've now set this how you want it. The next thing we're going to do now is we're going to make a bale for the top of this. So let's do that now. All right, so we've set our finished pendant aside, and what we're going to do is we're going to use our 16 gauge square wire. Like I said, I wanted a nice beefy wire for this because it's going to be doing a lot of the work, holding everything together. So I'm going to cut a 6-inch piece of this 16 gauge square wire. It should cut pretty easy with your flush cutters rather. So this is what I have, and then I'm going to spend some time just kind of straightening it out. Now, because it's a heavier wire, it may be a little more difficult to straighten out, and that's where some people like to use those pliers that have they use to straighten their wire straightening pliers, I guess is what they call them. I don't have a pair. If you have a pair, great, use them for this. I've just gotten so used to using my fingers to do this that I do this. Now we want this to be exactly 6 inches, okay? We don't want it to be longer, because then that will set our measurements off. So mine's just maybe about 1/4 of an inch too long. So I'm going to actually mark the 6-inch mark at the end. I'm going to cut that little bit off. But I want to find the center of this, which would then be 3 inches. So I'm going to mark the center with my fine tip permanent marker. And this part's really simple to do. This is not a hard task that we're going to be doing here. And I'm going to trim off that end so that my wire is exactly 6 inches long. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my round nose pliers, and I'm going to hold the wire between the jaws way down here at the bottom at its largest point. See where we're at? We're all the way down here at the end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just take the 2 arms and I'm just going to bend them around here just a bit. I'm not bringing them so that they come up against each other, but I'm just making a nice bend in this. Nice even bend. So that's about what we've got. And it might be just off just a little bit, and we can straighten that out there. Now, we want to kind of now compare it to the stone. So you see how far we are out? So I'm going to bring it in just a little bit. Okay, so that should be good right there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another measurement. And I'm going to measure from the bottom of each side about 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to mark that with the fine tip permanent marker. So 1/4 of an inch. Now you understand why I wanted to make sure that these were even, because that measurement would be off ever so slightly if we didn't have that. So I've got both of these sides now measured and marked at 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to now use my chasing hammer and my bench block. And I'm going to set the portion from that mark that we made in the that mark that we made at the tips, and I want to just put it so it's at the edge, and I'm just going to hammer that little bit from that mark down. I'm just going to tap it. And I don't want it paper thin, but I do want to kind of thin it out a little bit. And you don't want it too thin because then it makes it so difficult to work with. I'm going to do the same thing with the other end. Why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this because I want that section to be very strong, because that's going to be the section that connects to the pendant. I'm going to make a nice loop in this, and I want to make sure that it is nice and firm. Now, something else that I want to do also is I want to hold the bottom of this, and I want to hit the top portion of this with my rawhide mallet, just to give it a little bit more strength, because this is dead soft wire I'm using, and I want to hammer this just a little bit to give it a little more strength so that it springs a little bit. There, that should be good. Okay, now we're going back to our round nose pliers, and what you're going to do is we're going to put the tip of this, the bottom tip, about the center of the jaws, and we're going to start to curve this, and I always curve it toward me so I can see what I'm doing. So curved it, bent it a little bit, and now I'm going to reposition my pliers so that I can continue making that curve. And you want to bring it towards the top of the piece. So we see what we did here, and then I'm going to now put them back in. Now I've got it so that I can now, I'm going to use this side to center that. So I've got it back on here, and I'm just going to center it. All I did was bent it over the opposite side to center that on there. So you see what we've got here? This loop, this hook now is centered with this wire here. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to want to make the same size of a loop. So I give it a bend, and then I reposition, and I continue making that bend. And then when I'm just about closed, I go back, reposition it, and I use that free arm of the pliers, and I use that to bend this back over so that I've got now two hoops, two open hooks here, and we can then center these a little bit better. Just kind of straighten them out just so they look good. And we're going to close those. Now, you want to make sure that there isn't anything hanging on here that's going to cause it to be a weird one. So I've got just this little tip. I cut this backwards, and you may need to take a file and file these, but it looks like that. I just need to take just that little nib off. So this is what we have. This is what we've created. We've created this hook, and now we can put it on here. I've got the top of the stone here. This is the long end of the bottom, and I just want to put each of those hooks on there. And before I close those hooks up, I want to make sure that I'm centered first of all, which it looks like I've just bent everything just a little weirdly here. So I want to make sure that this is nice and centered. It's not, so let's go back. We'll just kind of, and all we're doing is we're just trying to bring this top of this curve to the center. And I use my fingers. You can use just about anything that's round. You can use a ring mandrel to kind of make sure you've got everything centered correctly. Okay, and we can put this back on here. Okay. I'm going to hold this out. Okay, the other thing we want to do is these ends have to also be in line with everything else, so we want to straighten those out. And we also want to add some tension to this, so I always like to kind of pull it out a little bit and then put back on here so that it adds tension, so that these two ears are at the outside, these two hoops are on the outside of the ears. So once you get it how you want it, just take your either your flat nose or your Wrapmaker pliers and just do these one at a time. Don't worry about if one comes unhooked, but you just want to close that loop into itself. See, so I just kind of pushed that all the way on there. I want to make sure it's nice and straight. And then I want to do the same thing over here. I want to take this little portion there, and we just want to close that loop up. There. So this is what we end up with. Now, this piece is going to rock back and forth, see? But when it's worn, it would be worn like that. There's lots of things you can do with this. You know, we're going to go over a couple of those in just a second. The first thing I want to show you, though, is this can be any type of loop you want. You can make a point at this top. You can make it triangle shaped. You can make it have a nice rounded, thin area up here. You can add more wire to this, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But something else I want to show you is I want to show you one more thing. So I do want to show you just one more little thing before we move on to me showing you some other things on here. I've got this closed ring here, and it's a pretty decent sized ring. Let me see if I can. It's about an inner diameter of about 8 millimeters. Outer is about 10 millimeters, and I'm going to use this as a bale as well. So what I'm going to do is I want to open up one of these sides, and you can do this before you put it all together, but I'm just going to open one side up just to be able to slide this ring on there. And what that can do is that can then become the bale for this. I'm not going to close that, but do you see what I'm saying? Now instead you can just put the chain or the cord through there. And a lot of times what I'll do is I will make this kind of oblong. I'll squish it with my Wrapmaker pliers into a nice loop, an oval as opposed to a circle. And that's another good way of doing that also. Let me show you something else you can do with these. So what I've got here is I've got another bale that I've made. This is just a secondary bale I had for this when I was kind of practicing making this piece just to make sure I knew what I was talking about. But this is the second one I made. And what I've got here is I've got a piece of 22 gauge square wire. And I've got it straightened out, and what I want to do is I want to put it towards the bottom of this piece, and I want to put a bend in it first of all. So we're going to put just a nice little bend in it, just a hook in it, and then it gives me a starting point here, and I'm going to put it here toward the bottom of one side of these bale wires, and I'm just going to bend it around the large bale piece, and I want it to be a nice tight hook or nice tight loop on here before I finish it up. So then once I get it nice and tight, I'm going to go to the back here. So I'm on the back side of it, and now what I want to do is I just want to trim off that excess wire, just a little tiny piece, and be careful that you don't cut everything off, because I've done that. If you've seen the outtakes for this, you would notice that I already did it once. So there we go. So then I'm just going to secure this around that side where I wanted it. And if you do have a rough edge here, you can use a file and clean that up. Now, the other end, I want to straighten it out a bit. And I want to go up here towards the top. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the end of the wire and I'm going to come around the piece, around the bale where I wanted it. Make any adjustments that you need to. And I'm just going to then curl it around the piece, and I'm using my Wrapmaker pliers just to make sure I get a nice tight secure piece there, and push it down in the back. And then just before we get it all the way down, I want to trim it off so I don't trim off too much. I'm off camera here. Let's get back on. There we go. Okay, so then I've got that nice little piece there, and I'm just going to push him down. There we go. Make sure that both sides are nice and secure. So then when I turn it over, see, I've got this design on it. And you can do it again. Continue the design a bit. You can crisscross them over one another. You can do so many things with this. So we'll put another wire on here, and I'll show you what it looks like. So I'm just going to make that little bend in it. And this one I'm going to start in about the same spot as the last one here, towards the bottom. And we're going to grab him and bring him around. There we go. Before we lock it into place, I'm going to move it where I want it. There. And this works great with square or round wire. I didn't have any round wire. I would be showing you with some round wire on this as well, which looks really good too. So I'm just going to trim off some of this excess. There. And we're going to go here at the top of this particular piece here. We're going to go above it, up here. And do the same thing. We're going to come around. Up here towards the top. And don't forget, now you need some place for the bale to be, for them to be able to attach something to this. So you don't want to go all the way up to the top and then take that out of there. That place for them to put the wire, or to put the cord. So you want to make sure that it's get plenty of room. And we'll trim this off. And we'll make sure we got everything nice and tight up against it. And what I'm doing is I'm just conforming this to the square shape of this bale wire. And making sure that everything... See, so now what we've done is we've added this decorative piece that needs to be just kind of cleaned up a little bit here. We can just take our pliers and straighten things out. And you can do this to that entire piece of frame wire and come up with something different. So if we were to add this now to here, you see, let's kind of push the other one out of the way, and let's just show what this would look like. See, so if we had this on there, it makes a big difference. So that's just something else you can do with this. So many things we can do with this piece. Hopefully you like what we've done here today. It's a great little project. See, now, wasn't that a great project to hold on to those big stones? You could even use a much larger cabochon in this one. Nice long cabochon would look great in this setting. It's really easy to make those adjustments to hold on to a nice good sized stone. So hopefully you enjoyed making it. And please do me a favor and hit subscribe if you're not already subscribed here. Hit the bell just so that you don't just to make sure that you don't miss anything. Who wants to miss any of my tutorials? These are great. And I want you to make sure that you tell everybody you know about this channel, because really we're trying to build up some nice work here. I'm keeping everything on here as free as possible, because learning shouldn't cost us anything, should it? So I want everybody to take advantage of this. And we're going to be doing some exploring of some really great pieces here coming up in the future. So again, my name was Jim McIntosh, and I'm glad you came by. And until the next video, I want you to remember what I always say: practice, practice, practice.